vengeance.
Well, it's been a while, and since then, a lot has happened in terms of Primal, some good, some spicy. In case you've been living under a rock, Primal Season 2 came out during this last summer. And you know what that means. It means I had to fish my friend Pish out of the Canadian pond he resides in and force him to do this video with me against his will. Just like I did the first time around, because tradition, am I right?
Hey guys, glad to be back. Also, please send help.
Also, I found out something weird. Apparently, Pish isn't actually a fish. Turns out he's just some weird dude that likes hanging out by the lake. Yeah, I guess this is his true identity right here. All jokes aside though, this has been one of the most anticipated videos on the channel as of recent, because the last one did extremely well. In fact, it's one of the most popular videos on my channel right now. So obviously, because we're like Hollywood executives, we had to make an unnecessary sequel for the sake of capitalizing off of the Primal hype. On the real though, even we admit that that last video could have been a lot better, so we're hoping to rectify our mistakes with this one. However, the iceberg this time around is definitely a little bit more bare, just because Season 2 was a bit more condensed compared to Season 1. Not to mention, the background info is a little bit more scarce considering Season 2 just came out. Season 1 had all sorts of mysteries that were kind of everywhere, leaving room for more discussion on different ideas and theories. But Season 2 is a lot more linear because unlike Season 1, Season 2 actually has an overarching story being developed. If you haven't seen it yet, do check it out before watching this video because there will be a lot of spoilers in it.
Also, if you guys want to take our iceberg and, do stuff with it, like add more or take entries off, or even try your hand at your own video, we don't really care, so we're completely fine with that. Just please credit us and we won't take you to court.
Alright, with that out of the way, let's get started. Red. Starting off simple, we have a new dinosaur character, for lack of a better term, who appears in episode 2 of the season. This is Red, a male tyrannosaur that Fang meets shortly after she and Spear separate from the Megalodon attack from the previous episode. He's about the same size as Fang, also has 2 fingers, but has a different color scheme, with him having a gray body with a red head and having small spikes running down from the back of his neck. Though shy at first, Red eventually takes a liking to Fang and is soon welcoming her to the new world that he inhabits. While we don't actually know too much about Red's lifestyle or backstory, what we do know is that he is some kind of tyrannosaur like Fang. A lot of people seem to have suspected that Red is a different type of tyrannosaur from Fang, but my own initial thoughts was that Red was exactly the same type of tyrannosaur as Fang, but the difference in facial features and colors is probably due to some kind of sexual dimorphism. But I could be wrong about that. Fang spends the night and day hanging out with Red before he shows her to the Celtic village that we'll talk about more later. Red starts attacking the people in the village because unlike Fang, his first reaction to people is to prey on them. Fang obviously is more trusting of humans and doesn't immediately attack them unless she absolutely has to. Despite this, Fang does get in on the carnage for the sake of helping Red, only for her to see that Spear had not only been crashing at the village, but befriended the people there too. Seeing Red as a threat, Spear attacks him, causing Fang to get in between the two and accidentally pushing Red into a wooden spike to keep him from killing Spear. This would end up killing Red, a dinosaur that, while we didn't know for very long, clearly brought a level of contentment in Fang's life that she hadn't had in a very long time. So seeing all of this play out like it was actually kind of tragic to see, and the impact is shown in the following episode in the form of Fang's catatonic state in the beginning of it. Luckily, this isn't necessarily the end of the road for Red or for Fang's happiness, because a couple of episodes later, it's revealed that Fang and Red had mated and she laid 3 eggs.
Sadly, no sex-like footage available.
Pish, go away, it's too early for you to be barging into my segments.
Cope.
And these newly laid eggs essentially pass on Red's legacy. Spoiler alert though, only 2 make it out alive by the end of the season, but at least Fang got to see her kids grow up this time, because, last time didn't go so well.
False predictions. Alright, so this entry is more of an update and a correction from a previous entry on the first iceberg we did for Primal a while back. Basically, in the last iceberg I detailed a theory I had on how Season 2 would play out, as little to no info in the second season was out at the time. The only thing we really had was that cliffhanger ending of episode 10 of Season 1. And in this entry I talked about how instead of building a raft, Spear and Fang might just stay behind, and the Scorpion Army, or as we know them now to be the Vikings, would eventually return to colonize the Lost World with the assistance of slave labor through people like Mira. Fast forward a whole year later and we finally get the trailer drop for Season 2. And lo and behold, I was wrong. Gee, who would have thought, huh? But yeah, when Season 2 was airing, Genndy did state in multiple interviews that they wanted the second season to follow a more episodic formula than Season 1. With this new formula, it would be easier to introduce many different further developed ancient civilizations, so having Spear and Fang travel across the ocean to accompany these big changes makes a lot of sense. Not gonna lie though, watching Season 2 did make me miss the old vibes of Season 1 when it was just Spear and Fang versus the prehistoric world, but hey, what you gonna do? Kamau. One of the most interesting aspects of Season 2 are the newly introduced recurring characters, one of them being Kamau. We're introduced to him in The Colossus Part 1, where he first meets the gang and immediately asserts dominance over them by showing off how wide he is. After a scuffle that results in one of Fang's 3 unborn babies being killed, we learn that Kamau actually works for the Egyptians and their queen Ima, who blackmail Spear, Fang, and Mira into surrendering, threatening to destroy the rest of Fang's eggs. We find out shortly after that Kamau has suffered a similar fate as the gang, in that he works for Queen Ima due to her having a hold of his daughter, who she holds captive and threatens to kill unless Kamau obeys her command. We see Kamau go to extreme lengths to keep his daughter safe, even when it means slaughtering an entire village of innocent people. Damn, man's definitely got a mad case of Vin Diesel syndrome. Spear and Fang end up joining up with Kamau during the sieges on other civilizations, slaughtering, looting, and conquering wherever they go. Things soon turn ugly after a failed escape by Spear, Fang, and Mira, who are once again blackmailed into surrendering by threatening the life of Fang's 2 newly hatched babies. Fang is set to be executed by Kamau himself, who is instructed to bring an axe down on her head. Just as it seems like he's about to follow through, we get a flashback scene to what his life was like before his entire tribe was enslaved. We see his people all living peacefully, and we also glimpse at their pacifist mentality, in how Kamau stops his daughter from killing a spider with a stick, and instead opts to using the old cup with a piece of paper trick to release it outside in peace. This pacifism is also shown by Kamau's people when the Egyptians arrive. Instead of retaliating, we see them all just kinda get on their knees in submission, except for Kamau, who stands and fights to protect his daughter until Queen Ima manages to hold her at knife point. Snapping back to reality, he finally decides he's had enough and uses the axe to slice Fang's chains and then throws it at the queen, who barely dodges out of the way. With Fang now freed, Kamau manages to take back his daughter, and the pair make their way below the deck of the Colossus to where the rest of their tribe is being forced to row the massive ship. With some encouragement from Kamau, his people eventually stand up and rebel, as they storm the deck and take out the rest of the Egyptian soldiers, with Kamau being the one to take out Queen Ima once and for all. With the ship now in Kamau and his people's possession, and his daughter safe, Spear, Fang, and Mira take one of the smaller boats, and they go their separate ways, with them all exchanging one last smiling farewell glance before they split. So yeah, all in all, Kamau proved to be a pretty interesting character, as he quickly became a fan favorite and is also one of the only characters we ever see in the show who actually gets a happy ending. It messes me up seeing someone who wouldn't even hurt something as universally hated as a spider driven to the point of massacring innocent people, but I'm happy Kamau was able to end things on a good note. He got the ending he deserved.
Queen Ima. Yes, the character that nobody likes, Queen Ima, but more popularly known as Queen Bitch. I mean, where do I begin with this character? Queen Bitch is one of the season's main enemies to Spear, Mira, and Fang, and she is brutal. Basically, she's the leader of a group of people resembling some kind of exaggerated Egyptian civilization, and they're basically ocean nomads. Queen Bitch and her army reside on a very large ship known as the Colossus that they use to travel to various parts of the world to pillage, destroy, and massacre other civilizations, peaceful or not. As you'd expect, this has resulted in several innocent lives being taken at the hands of the prisoners that she controls, including Spear, Fang, and Kamau. It's resulted in some of the most brutal points in this show that are actually kind of hard to watch. You'd think she'd kill these characters off with how powerful they are, but to add more coldness to her own character, she decides to use Spear, Fang, and Kamau to do most of the dirty work for her by blackmailing them, but she herself is also a pretty strong fighter. She's definitely not one to go down without a fight, as seen throughout the series. That's how she was able to capture Kamau's daughter, who she constantly threatens to kill if Kamau doesn't do what she wants him to do. It's also seen in the 9th episode when she completely loses control of her ship. This doesn't stop her from trying to fight her way out of the mess, but luckily for everyone in the show and everyone watching it, Kamau is able to deal the final blow to this awful character by throwing her bitch ass off the Colossus and onto a smaller prisoner boat, where she becomes completely mangled and destroyed. What's ironic about her death is that earlier in the season she actually kicked off a captured king from one of the civilizations she overran, which kind of foreshadows her own death that would take place in the 9th episode.
Viking Chieftain. The Viking Chieftain is pretty unique because he's the only character who shows up in Season 2 who's actually alluded towards in Season 1, with Mira drawing his figure in the dirt in Slave of the Scorpion. We see him for the first time on screen in The Red Mist, returning to his village with his son Eldar, only to find that literally everyone, including his wife Rika and younger son, have been brutally murdered. In a pretty twisted way, Spear and Fang basically end up becoming what the Red Rexes in Season 1 were to them in the Viking Chieftain's eyes. And it's from this moment forward where VC, as we'll be referring to them from here on out, decides to dedicate the rest of his screen time towards murdering the fuck out of our protagonists. In the episode Vidar, father and son both set out to take the gang down, and they actually put up a pretty decent fight. I love this little moment where Spear rushes him only to be kicked in the face, and his reaction says it all. They're pretty much the only characters they've met so far that managed to hold their own pretty well, and you get the hint that Spear and VC kind of have this whole main rival thing going on, which is kind of cool. But anyway, Eldar ends up getting knocked into the river, which causes VC to abandon ship in order to save his son. It's in scenes like this where we see the lengths VC goes to in order to protect his family, and it paints him in a different light than many of the other antagonists we've seen in the series thus far, because it humanizes him. At night, resting by the fire, we see him reflecting on everything that's happened, only to be visited by this ominous figure that materializes in the flames and then quickly disappears. Spooky. The next morning, the pair try again, but this time they use these giant vulture bird mounts who sort of resemble the real-life extinct bird species Argentavis. They arrive at Fang's nesting site and once again attempt to take out the gang. This time though, it doesn't really go too well because VC ends up getting knocked off his mount. Bro, he needs some milk. But Eldar also ends up getting knocked off and isn't as lucky because he dies from fall damage. Devastated at the loss of his entire family, VC lies dormant and we see these Valkyrie-esque divine spirits descend down from the heavens, so it looks like he's about to have his send-off. That is until a bunch of demons pop out of the goddamn ground and drag his ass down to literal hell where he meets Satan himself, who gives him the opportunity at one last chance of vengeance through granting him the power of super hot fire.
Sweet dollar tea from McDonald's.
Yep.
I drink that. Super hot fire. I spit that. 2.5 men. I watched that.
By the way, I didn't skip over anything. All that stuff literally happens in the span of like 2 minutes. This is where we see VC resurface with his new fiery getup, where he spends the next 3 episodes doing a badass walk cycle towards our protagonists. And now we reach the last episode of the season, Echoes of Eternity. We get to see a little bit of Mira's backstory here, where we see that VC was actually the one who came to the lands Mira's people reside in and captured her. We also see him yell in anger when Mira manages to escape and jump overboard, triggering the events of Slave of the Scorpion in Season 1. And then we get the final confrontation, with Spear and Fang meeting VC once again face to face. But this time, with his new demonic power, he's not fucking around. Here we see the many supernatural abilities that he's been granted, from shooting streams of fire from his hands, summoning flaming battle axes, and even shapeshifting into the form of a giant snake. Anyway, the iconic duo end up getting trapped at the top of a cliff where Fang gets toasted and Spear, who's having none of that, rushes into the fray, only to get turned into a human torch. But he's not done just yet. Deciding to go out with a bang, Spear ends up going full primal, baby. Dive tackles the fire demon off the mountain, socking him in the goddamn face while they're both falling, all the while being on freaking fire. It's easily one of the most badass moments we've ever seen on the show. But obviously, Spear's the one who ends up taking the L after this move as he lays at the foot of the mountain charred to the core. VC gets the utter Vidar one last time before being dragged back down to hell, with the whole contract of offering his soul to the fire giant at a chance for vengeance seemingly complete. And yeah, that's the last time we see the Viking chieftain and pretty much where his story ends. Without a doubt, one of the most, if not the most impactful new character introduced this season, as he's presented as sort of a foil to the main character Spear, and even ends up being the one to ultimately kill off Spear in the end. Sort of like Kamau, he's another character who we see go to extreme lengths for the sake of family, to the point of him walking a much darker path. Definitely one of the standout characters of the second season.
Spear's flashback. For me, one of the best sequences of the season is Spear's flashback. It may not seem like anything too special, but it's actually a pretty significant event in Spear's life that continues to show us why he's the great Neanderthal warrior that he is. In this flashback, we see Spear as a young boy with his father, the only other family member of Spear's that we ever see in the show, aside from his family in the beginning of the first season. It's clear they're trying to convey that Spear's father was a good father. He would also prove to be a strong fighter himself after a pride of Sabertooths attacked their cave. Spear's father protects the rest of the tribe and his son as best as he can, even managing to break one of the sabers' necks with his bare arms. And if this wasn't crazy enough, this motherfucker literally gets his arm bitten off by one of the sabers, and he still has enough fight in him to kill a couple more of them off. But as great of a fighter as he was in the short time we saw him, he unfortunately gets killed and devoured by the Pride. Understandingly angered at this, Spear fights off the rest of the Pride, killing the rest of them and avenging his father. Along with this, he proves himself worthy to the rest of the tribe. This flashback represents the very event that would make Spear transition from a boy to a man, explaining why he's a great fighter that we see him as in the present day.
Nice to know where Spear got those 6 spearnet skills from. Voice actor and character name trivia. One thing that I always appreciate finding that I feel is overlooked in any form of media are the little details that the creators of projects put into their worlds or their characters. And Primal is no exception. While a lot of this trivia isn't like major jaw-dropping information, I still thought it'd be fun to cover nonetheless. For example, the Viking chieftain's eldest son Eldar's name means warrior who fights with fire in Nordic. Not only does his name purposely sound like the word elder, as he's obviously the eldest son, but the meaning of his name also foreshadows his father's fate, which I think is pretty cool. Moving on, Kamau's name translates to quiet warrior, which originates from the Kikuyu language from Kenya. Not only is this a cool detail because it suggests that Kamau and his people were native to some region of Africa in the world of Primal, but it's also funny because Kamau literally is the exact thing that his name means, in that he's a quiet warrior who never speaks in the entire show. Lastly, just a nice little bit of trivia, Spear and Mira's daughter, who's seen in the last scene of episode 10, who has been nicknamed Dagger by some of the fans of the show, is voiced by Lila Tartakovsky, who's obviously the daughter of Genndy Tartakovsky, so that's kinda cool. Oh, also real quick, while doing research on Primal's voice cast list for this entry, I learned that one of those monkey caveman guys from season 1 is voiced by Tom Kenny. I have no more words, this is just perfect.
Red Mist.
Diego, I don't think that's it, Chief.
Oh shit, you're right, my bad. In episode 4 of season 2, Spear and Fang finally locate the Viking-esque tribe that had kidnapped Mira and the other prisoners. And while they manage to sneak into the village and break them out of the structure they're held in, the group is stopped by the tribe's warriors. Spear and Fang defend themselves against the warriors, but things take a really unexpected turn after a young boy attacks Spear, to which he reacts by grabbing the boy and blindly throwing him out of the way, accidentally hurling him headfirst into a rock, instantly killing him. At first, Spear is in shock, enough shock to try to get him and Fang out of there to avoid more killing. As they do this, a red mist begins to envelop around the village, allowing Spear and Fang to hide within it so that they can slip away. Unfortunately, they're cornered, and with no options left than to fight off the army of Vikings, that's exactly what they end up doing. But it soon becomes less of a fight and more of a massacre, as our heroes start brutally killing and slaughtering everyone in the village, visibly enraged while doing so. And while the red mist might look like a cool aesthetic that's used as a visual piece to represent the extreme anger that Spear and Fang hold against their enemies as they continue slaughtering them one by one, it actually has more meaning to it. But yes, this red mist has shown up in the show before, and to emphasize the same anger that I just mentioned. For example, the mist showed up all the way back in the very beginning of the show when Spear witnessed his family being murdered by the Red Rex pack. The change to the red-tinted mist just shows the intense emotions of anguish and rage that Spear was going through during that moment in time. The mist also kind of shows up in the 4th episode of season 1, The Terror Under the Blood Moon, more as a way to give off a horror-esque tone to the episode. This could also indicate that the red mist has some level of symbolism in the show, because the events of Spear losing his family in the 1st episode is somewhat the same tragedy that the chieftain and his son Eldar go through when their family is slaughtered by Spear and Fang. But red mist also has an informal meaning to it that can also be applied here in the show. Red mist is a phrase that's often used to describe an intense feeling of anger to the point where it can cloud one's mind to make rational decisions. And considering the kind of frustration Spear is shown to have in this episode of the second season towards the Viking village, it would be no surprise that he would eventually reach a boiling point, clouding his better judgment of maybe just trying to find a way out of there, and instead resorting to causing a killing spree to the whole village. In doing this, the show once again shows us the more brutal side to Spear and Fang, which is something that's not new to the audience, but the way it's shown here makes me and many others feel that Spear and Fang had become the villains in this episode, especially when the Viking chieftain and his son Eldar, who were absent during this massacre, come home to find their people and family killed. Of course, it's a rather conflicting scenario, as putting ourselves in these characters' shoes doesn't change the fact that they had kidnapped and most likely murdered several innocent people themselves. But that's a tangent for a different entry. The Primal Theory. So the Primal Theory is a very interesting idea and episode, both of which deserve a spot here on the iceberg. Really, the idea itself is pretty straightforward, but how it's executed in the show is what makes it such a unique entry. The Primal Theory episode is the 5th episode of the second season and is a big twist to the entire show because in this episode, it doesn't focus on the main story revolving around Spear and Fang. In fact, it's set in a seemingly different point in time and place, which is said to be in 1890 England in the very start of the episode. To summarize this episode, it revolves around a group of 19th century inspired academics meeting up in one of their estates to discuss a theory that one of them has. This person is Charles, and he's clearly supposed to mimic the real-life scientific figure Charles Darwin. Charles had gathered all of the men there to introduce his theory, which posits that despite the modern advancements of man, they aren't far off from the primitive and savage state of their ancestors, and given the right circumstances, it may very well be possible that they could one day revert back to that original primal state. Some of the men disagree, especially Lord Darlington, while others hear Charles out, and the discussion continues until an officer eventually arrives to warn them about a madman that had recently escaped imprisonment from a nearby institution. Shortly after the officer leaves, the men eventually realize that the madman is in the house with them. As the madman starts picking them off one by one, the men arm themselves in defense. What's cool about this episode is that everything the main characters do is reflective of the theory that Charles had mentioned earlier. In order to defend themselves against the intruder, they arm themselves with guns. However, the madman is extremely quick and strong, and during one of the scuffles, they lose their weapons in the process. At this point, Darlington decides to handfight the madman, as it's revealed that he used to be a boxer when he was younger. And he does manage to hold his own pretty well against the extremely powerful madman, but that doesn't last too long, forcing Charles to arm himself with a shield and sword hung on the wall, while Darlington grabs a bow and arrow, managing to land some hits on the enemy. The fight is taken to the greenhouse, which is struck by a fallen tree, to which Darlington takes the opportunity to grab a new weapon, a spear, which he uses to fight brutally against the madman. During this final confrontation, you end up seeing the savage state that Darlington had reverted to given the severity of this life or death situation. It's a matter of survival, and drastic times call for drastic measures, even if it means killing the enemy, which is exactly what Darlington does, essentially confirming Charles's theory from the beginning. This is further corroborated by the fact that in the beginning, the men had started out using advanced weapons like guns as their means of defense at first, but the weapons become progressively less advanced as the episode continues. They started with guns, but eventually end with a spear. And there are little clues in the final fight as well, as the madman and Darlington are both shown to mimic movements and behavior that we've seen with Spear in previous episodes. For example, the way Darlington delivers the final blow to the madman is similar, if not the same, as Spear's final blow to the Red Rex in the first episode of Season 1. Along with this, the meaning behind the Primal Theory can go as far as possibly even explaining the placement of the episode itself in the season. To many, it seemed weird that this episode was randomly placed in the middle of the season, interrupting Spear and Fang's ongoing story. However, the placement of the episode could very well be intentional. After all, it was right after Spear and Fang resorted to their much more savage side to fight against and slaughter the Viking village, making them go past the point of rational thinking, just like Darlington resorted to brutally fighting the madman for the sake of survival, also resorting past the point of rational thinking. This episode also brings up a question that many people in the fanbase have wondered: when is Primal set in? The past, the present, or the future? And considering this episode literally brings up a theory that man will revert back to their primal state under the right circumstances, it's led many people to assume that this episode is trying to imply that the Primal universe is set in a distant future where that exact event took place, leading man to descend back to a more primitive mindset. However, Genndy Tartakovsky did an interview with Entertainment Weekly where they asked him this question. Some viewers think Primal Theory proves the rest of the show is actually set in the far future. Can you comment on that? To which Tartakovsky responded simply with, absolutely not in the future. Which, in my opinion, is a little weird to hear from him considering he's kept several other aspects of the show very ambiguous, and I would have assumed that this would have been one of the things that he would have wanted to keep ambiguous, to keep people talking about the Primal universe. But nope, he just immediately shuts that theory down and confirms that it's not set in the future.
Civilizations. One of the biggest changes that Primal underwent from seasons 1 to 2 was the introduction of more human characters and civilizations. I wanted to give a little spotlight to each one we see so that we can take a quick look at who they are and what they're based off of. First up, we have the Celts, who live in a small village settlement we see in the second episode of the season, Shadows of Fate. The Celts are a pretty basic civilization who appear to be similar to Spear in levels of advancement, brandishing spears and wearing loincloths. Oh yeah, and the language we hear the Celtic chiefs speak is Ancient Gaelic. Other than that, there isn't really too much to say about them, just sort of guys being dudes and act as a little introduction to the strange new land Spear and Fang wind up in. Next up are the Vikings, who we've already talked about a little. These guys ride bears and act like it's normal. And they also brand everything they own with the sigil of a scorpion, including people. The scorpion is probably used to represent themselves. Not gonna lie though, Vikings using a scorpion is kind of an odd choice considering they live in a northern landscape where there probably aren't many scorpions around. Aside from that, we don't know too much about any religious figures or policies they follow, aside from the Viking chieftain making reference to the Nordic figure Vidar a lot, which may suggest some form of religion or belief. And they also speak the Nordic language itself. We'll talk about this more in the Norse mythology segment. Next up are the Egyptians. These guys own a massive ship called the Colossus, and no, it doesn't run on oil, it runs on slave labor. The Egyptians are characterized by their queen's everlasting need to conquer and massacre everything in sight. Although they're obviously inspired by ancient Egyptians, they're also loosely based on seafaring raiders which invaded coastal nations during the collapse of the Bronze Age. In the time Spear, Fang, and Mira spend under the rule of the Egyptians, we see them travel to and trample over many of our civs, including Babylonians, Philistines, Chinese, Romans, and early Slavs, where we see each one being brought down by the combined might of Spear, Fang, and Kamau. There's also the pacifists who offer their resources to the Egyptians peacefully and appear to be based off ancient Hindus. And their fate, as sad as it may be, is similar to all the other civilizations that were raided before them. We also see Kamau's tribe later on, who appear to be native to some region of Africa based on Kamau's name coming from a language native to Kenya, and they also uniquely display degrees of gigantism in that they're all much bigger and stronger than your average person. Last but not least, we have Mira's tribe, who are alluded to being Aborigines and speak Arabic. We know that they have religious beliefs as we see Mira pray to the moon many times throughout the course of the show. We also know Mira is the daughter of the tribe's leader, which is confirmed in the final episode. And yeah, that's pretty much every ancient civ we get a glimpse of in season 2. I will say it's definitely weird knowing that the prehistoric land we see in season 1 exists in the same world as all these civs that are loosely based off of real ones from our own world. It definitely gives the second season a more grounded tone, which works better with the episodic format. Primal promos and bumpers. So on the previous Iceberg, I talked about an entry that covered some of the promos and bumpers for Primal on the channel it airs on, Adult Swim. And obviously, since it's been a hell of a long time since the first Iceberg dropped, you bet there's been some more Primal related stuff shown on the channel. Also, this is all coming from someone who's an Adult Swim enthusiast, so I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. First up, we get a bumper titled Worms, which sees Spear and Fang resting only to discover some earthworms. And with their snake-like figure, cause Fang to freak out and run away, stepping on them and leaving a footprint in the dirt with the worms making up the Adult Swim logo. It's very short and quick, but I actually really like how it incorporates the characterization of Fang from the show itself. There's also another one titled Asteroid Whack, where Spear and Fang see an asteroid hurtling towards Earth, so the pair use the power of teamwork to casually launch Spear into the stratosphere so that he can divert the space rock, with the flames making up the Adult Swim logo at the end. I know these bumpers are super simple and are only meant to act as bridges between the shows on Adult Swim, but I can't help but appreciate them for what they are with all their unique art styles and little quirks. Oh, and also I can't forget the bumper segments from Toonami as well, which I actually used an audio clip from in the video intro. Also, talk about good timing, because literally the same day I was writing the script, Toonami announced that they were doing a Primal Season 2 marathon on Christmas Eve. Hell yeah.
Survive the holiday with our Primal Marathon.
Saturday from midnight till 2 a.m. Only Toonami on Adult Swim.
Norse mythology. So with the introduction of a bunch of new civilizations over the course of Season 2, also came the focus on mythology relating to those different civs, especially from Norse mythology relating to the Vikings. First up, we'll look at the episode Vidar, which even has its own unique Nordic rune title card to boot, which is pretty cool. Now obviously there's the title of the episode, but Vidar is also something spoken by the Viking chieftain and his son Eldar over the course of the episode. And Vidar is the name of the Norse god of vengeance and a son of Odin, so you can kind of get the idea of them using the word. I mean, you know, since they're hunting Spear and Fang who massacred their whole village. Now, we don't really know if they're supposed to be making reference to the god directly or if they're just outright saying revenge, because we don't really see the Vikings allude to the figure of Vidar or show any sign of religious beliefs relating to the figure anywhere else. We then see this whole Vidar thing come full circle when the chieftain gets dragged to the underworld and meets the fire giant face to face. Again, we don't really know if the chieftain knows who the fire giant is or if he was alluding to the fire giant itself when he says Vidar, but he's bestowed demonic power in order to get revenge on the caveman and the dinosaur who took his family. In my opinion, I like to think that the fire giant itself is actually supposed to be the equivalent of Vidar in the world of Primal, and granted the chieftain this opportunity after seeing his bloodlust and tenacity to put an end to Spear and Fang. We already know it was watching him before he entered the underworld, thanks to that moment when it appears in the campfire. One thing that I wonder about though is if other gods in the Primal universe exist. I mean, aside from those angelic Valkyries and the fire demons, we don't really see anything else in the entirety of Season 2. We don't even figure out why Mir's people pray to the moon, because it was never really explained if there's some kind of mythological figure associated with it or whatever. So yeah, in summary, Vidar or not, it's cool that some level of Norse mythos made its way into the show to accompany the Vikings. I just wish some aspects of it could have been fleshed out a little bit more.
The Fire Giant. The Fire Giant is a very strange enemy in the Primal universe, and brings up a lot of questions for me. The demon, also sometimes called the Fire Giant, Satan, and some people have even called it the Scorpion, which was the name referenced at the end of Season 1, is more of an indirect enemy to Spear and Fang. If anything, it's more associated with the Viking chieftain story than Spear and Fang's. After the chieftain loses his last son Eldar to Spear, Mira, and Fang while trying to fight them for massacring their tribe, he had pretty much given up on all hope and is ready to die. And the sequence that follows pretty much confirms the existence of deities or some kind of heaven and hell in the Primal universe, because as he's being lifted in the sky by angels of some kind, clearly indicating him succumbing to his injuries, he's suddenly pulled into the hellish underworld ruled by a giant satanic-like demigod. The Fire Giant makes it clear that it wants Spear and Fang's demise, something that the chieftain also wants. What I'm picking up from this scene is that the Fire Giant is trying to make some kind of deal with the Viking chieftain, allowing him to have some of his power to go after Spear and Fang to avenge his family. And in return, the Fire Giant gets his soul. At least, that's what I initially picked up. In truth, there's a lot of ambiguity when it comes to the relationship between the Fire Giant and the Viking chieftain, with the Fire Giant's intentions not being 100% clear. Why does it want Spear and Fang so badly? It's proven that it can emerge in the overworld at certain points of the show, so why doesn't it just get Spear and Fang itself? Maybe this indicates that its presence in the show doesn't actually have anything to do with our main characters. The Viking chieftain's heart is now filled with rage and vengeance, something that the Fire Giant probably feeds on and in turns enables the chieftain to exact his revenge. Of course, if this was the case, this brings up the question as to why the Fire Giant intervened in the final battle when the chieftain was so close to finishing off Spear and Fang. Maybe the Fire Giant wanted to give the illusion that the chieftain can be so close to getting the satisfaction of killing the people that killed his family so that he can take it away from him right then and there. This theory could make sense actually, and it does somewhat connect to Spear and Fang as well. Since the Fire Giant's job is to punish those that make it to the underworld, at least that's what I would assume considering he's some sort of Satan-like creature, it would make sense that this whole thing could very well be planned. There's this mortal Viking Viking who has clearly done enough bad things to earn him a spot in hell, where he's forced to be punished for his bad deeds, but right before that happens, his family is murdered by a caveman and a dinosaur that are merely pawns in the fire giant's overall punishment for the Viking. With everything panning out as it did, leading to the Viking's death, the fire giant seized the opportunity to put his plan into play by giving the chieftain the illusion that he was being offered a second chance to exact revenge against Spear and Fang, when in reality he gets so close to finishing the job but doesn't even get the satisfaction of delivering the final blow to Spear as he's pulled back down to the pits of hell by the fire giant itself. Of course, this is just a theory. Again, this is one of those cases that are kept pretty ambiguous, most likely on purpose, which is something that Tartakovsky has said himself. In the same interview mentioned earlier, when he's asked about the name of the fire giant and where it's supposed to be, he says this. The name of the episode before was Vidar, which is actually the old Nordic name for revenge. People kind of associated it with the demon guy. Whether it's the devil or Satan, it's the demigod of hell. I like it when the audience make it their own. Some people were saying that it's the god of revenge, and that works too. It's definitive in the story, but you can classify it in the way you want to. The show, I've always said, it's pulp. There's man and dinosaurs, so you know you're historically not accurate. Then we've got witches, magic, vampire man-bats. Getting dragged into the underworld to empower yourself for revenge is all part of it.
Concept art. One thing that Season 2 is definitely lacking in when compared to Season 1, and hopefully this changes with time, is behind the scenes stuff such as animatic pitches and concept art. So much so in fact that I was actually only able to find one post made by Genndy himself showing some of it off. The concept art shown here was released when Season 2 was still airing and shows the designs of the Vikings. Here we get to see some little details such as Genndy wanting Eldar's features to be small and close together, as well as the fur in the chief's armor getup belonging to that of a bear. We also got to see one early colored background concept by Scott Willis. But other than this, other concept art for anything else Season 2 related just hasn't been released to the public. This goes for Genndy's famously awesome animatic pitches too, so I hope with time we get to see him do his awesome voiceovers for more of those.
Spear and Fang name origins. So one of the topics that I meant to include in the Season 1 iceberg was the origins of Spear and Fang's names. While simple names that are given to them to describe their defining features, Spear being called Spear because he literally uses a spear, and Fang being called Fang because of her larger tooth that protrudes on one side of her jaw, there's actually more meaning behind their names. If I remember correctly, at some point here on the channel, I've mentioned Tartakovsky's inspirations behind the show, one of them being Conan the Barbarian books by Robert E. Howard, an American pulp fiction author. But Howard had also made a short story in 1925 that was called Spear and Fang, the names that Tartakovsky would base his two main characters after. The short story revolves around a caveman who has to save his lover after she is abducted by a cannibalistic humanoid creature called the Neanderthaler. The title, Spear and Fang, is supposed to signify the battle between the hero and the monster of this story, which actually comes down to intelligence versus savagery. Intelligence is seen in the caveman who is named Ganor with his use of his spear, while savagery can be seen in the cannibalistic Neanderthaler with its use of its own fangs and brute force. Now, this concept can be seen in Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal, more specifically in the characters that he's created for the show. Except instead of a battle between intelligence and savagery, these two things are actually used together to fight the battles. While in the show, both Spear and Fang have their levels of both intelligence and savagery, more intelligence can be seen in Spear than in Fang, and more savagery can be seen in Fang than in Spear. And that just comes down to the species they are. Obviously, humans are much more advanced species than dinosaurs in terms of intelligence, but dinosaurs are a lot stronger and more primitive than humans. However, Spear and Fang use these two traits to their advantage to fight off other creatures together, rather than fighting each other like in Howard's short story. Original storyline. Primal as a whole was a show that went through several different iterations. We've already discussed its origins when Tartakovsky started with a simple concept that involved a child and a dinosaur in a more kid-friendly story.
I came up with the idea a while ago, and it took a while for viewing to catch up to having adult animation be okay. Like, it actually started off as a dinosaur and a kid writing it. So it was all like very 6 to 11, right?
Before he would shelve the project and bring it back years later under a completely different style, one that was much more intense and mature and adult-oriented. However, as Tartakovsky had explained in an interview shortly before the airing of Season 2, he revealed that the story arc element to the show was initially supposed to appear in Season 1, but thinking they could do something different with Season 1, they decided to push that story arc to Season 2. They finished up Season 1 and started working on Season 2 with the story arc element in mind. However, Tartakovsky admits that what they were initially going for in Season 2 was essentially just too cliche. He states this in one interview saying, "Once we started to break it down, I realized we're kind of breaking what we've established to a degree, and we're heading into the world of cliches. As soon as you introduce some kind of primitive early civilizations, you're instantly in 10,000 BC or Stargate, and all that stuff, and it didn't really feel right for Primal, so I had to rethink it. And eventually, we would get the Season 2 we see today, but that does bring up the question, what was this original idea? Aside from what's implied in the interview, what else about it was cliche? How much of it would make it into the final product? What ideas did they have for this storyline that they originally thought of before scrapping it? As far as I can tell, not much from this original storyline from the second season was actually revealed, and it probably will most likely stay that way considering how early in development this took place in. Not to mention the fact that we don't really know how far they got into it before eventually scrapping it, but it's interesting to think about.
Season 2 ending. So, Season 2 ending.
Oh yeah, Season 2 ending.
So, Diego, now that you're here, do you want to maybe, give your thoughts, or...
Man, this is your entry, you talk about it.
I kind of don't want to.
What do you mean you don't want to? Do your job. We selected these entries specifically that we were going to cover.
Hey, I didn't select this entry for myself. You selected it for me.
Prove it.
Alright, first of all, fuck you, Diego. And second of all, okay, fine, I'll do my job. If there's one word I would use to describe the ending of Season 2, it would be rushed.
And chorizo.
Diego, we don't talk about that.
Pish, we can't hide from it forever.
I don't want to talk about Spears' burnt-ass cock and ball. What I will say is that my initial reaction wasn't exactly a sense of satisfaction or excitement. It was more like, wait, that was it?
Same. The ending to the season at first felt like it was going to end on a cliffhanger to lead to a possible Season 3, but all of the major events of the episode were just pushed together in a matter of minutes rather than being fleshed out in a way that felt natural.
Yeah, the fact that Mira seems to, do what she does out of pity for Spear also kind of loses the significance of the scene, and obviously the bigger deal of them doing it while Spear is out here looking like an extra crispy chicken McNugget. Also, I'm sort of questioning how what happened is even possible, because, the state of Spear's thing, would he even be able to...
His children are fucking melted!
There were also other opportunities for them to include this scene in a way that would have felt more natural, like the scene where Spear and Mira are praying to the moon together while traveling earlier on. And also, maybe when Spear isn't about to die from blistering injuries and burn infections. This leads to the final scene of the episode and the season as a whole, where we see Fang and her offspring, as well as Mira and her and Spear's daughter in the future. And this scene is supposed to be a big send-off and like the end of an era for Spear and Fang's story and all. But at the same time, I can't focus on it because I'm still over here thinking about what the fuck I just watched. I don't know, dude, call me a critic, but I just thought the ending could have been handled a little better.
They could have done anything else to pay respects to Spear, but what they did instead felt very insulting. Because on top of making him look like a burnt testicle, they also made Mira low-key violate him when he was at his weakest.
But that's the ending of Season 2, which brings up the question for what the future of Primal looks like. There's a lot to that, so Diego will take over that entry in the final tier.
Bear vs. Fang was inspired by the Grizzly Bear vs. T-Rex meme. Okay, I'll admit this is actually just a joke entry, but I thought I'd include it because the timing was just too good. During the time the second season aired, there was this meme going around on the paleo side of the internet that featured an excerpt from a very outdated Walt Disney book from 1971 called True Life Adventures: Animal Ghosts. Basically, this excerpt explains that even though the Tyrannosaurus Rex was this large and strong animal, it was still slow both physically and mentally, and therefore would most likely lose a fight against a bear if they were to ever encounter each other. And what's funny about this is that at the end of the third episode of the second season of Primal, Spear and Fang are residing in a cave for the night during their ongoing search for Mira. They awake later that night to intruders who are a pair of cavemen warriors riding on what many have concluded to be prehistoric bears. The conflict between Spear and Fang and these two Vikings is short, but it also proves that, at least in the Primal universe, a Tyrannosaur is able to take down a bear pretty easily, as Fang's able to take down the bear no problem. There's no actual correlation between the meme and this encounter, at least none that I know of, but I thought it was a pretty funny coincidence.
Wow, good stuff, dude. Notice how hard I'm laughing right now.
Fuck off, Pish, I could be funny too. Season 3. Okay, I won't lie, we were pretty strapped for entries that were obscure, ambiguous, and or disturbing enough to put into the depths of the iceberg. But there was one thing that was definitely deserving of discussion, and that's the future of Primal itself. And considering just how unknown the future is for Primal, it was actually pretty fitting to put this entry very last on the list. As we've already mentioned, the second season closes the book on Spear and Fang's story. However, it's possible that it may close the book to this entire story overall. What I mean by that is, Tartakovsky seems to be mulling over the idea of basically continuing Primal, but under completely different stories, sticking to a more anthological format from what I'm picking up here. During an interview with The Wrap, he explains, "I want to make Primal basically a brand. What I mean by that is it could be Primal with a completely different story, but it's still called Primal, and it still represents this more visceral, raw, almost no dialogue visual storytelling. The next series, if we do one, it could be in World War II, or it could be aliens, or it could be something completely different, but still exploring this emotional, violent, surviving type of idea." However, nothing at the moment seems to be set in stone, and the future of Primal is kind of up in the air. Because while Tartakovsky brings this idea up of possibly doing completely different stories in different points in time, yet still keeping them under the Primal name, he also says this in a later interview after being asked if he's going to use Spear's daughter to continue the show or maybe do something else. He says, "I see it ending. I don't want to do this story further. I feel like this season we've done it all in a way. I want it to almost become an anthology show where season 3 would still be called Primal, but a different subheading. Low dialogue, high emotion, survival, rawness, visual storytelling, all that stuff, but with different characters. There's more things I want to do with Primal, not necessarily Spear and Fang. Maybe if there's a giant outcry, we'll continue the story with his daughter and Mira and the dinosaurs. I'd really have to think about it." So yeah, this early on, there really isn't a clear answer as to what we should expect to see for the future of Primal. However, in the same interview, Tartakovsky was asked about his newest project, a show called Unicorn Warriors Eternal. He briefly goes through his roadmap of future projects. He says, "We're looking at maybe sometime next year, maybe at the end of this year. And then I'm working full on Fixed, that rated R feature for New Line. And then starting development on season 3. I have an idea that I'm really excited about, one idea that's rising to the top. After doing 5 seasons of Samurai Jack, 2 seasons of Primal, all of the Clone Wars that we did, I've done so much battles and action. If I was going to do it again, what would I do? How can I make it interesting for me and the audience, so that it's not just a repeat of what I've already done? That's why I was so excited about Primal. I haven't done caveman fighting style. He's got no skills, it's just rawness. To choreograph fights like that was really fun. Pushing it into a season 3 of Primal, if it gets there, what's different? What can I do that I haven't done?" So while we know nothing officially for what's going to happen in season 3 of Primal, it's clear that Tartakovsky plans to continue it at some point in the future. And that was the Primal Season 2 Iceberg.
Hey, can I leave now?
Sorry it took so long to get this one out. It takes forever to go to Canada to fish out this dude over here.
Yo, I didn't ask to be here. You literally kidnapped me.
Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. The future of Primal is still a bit up in the air, as I've already mentioned before, but if or when Season 3 comes out, we'll probably cover it. But until then, check out our other stuff on our channels. Pish also has a channel that he posts on, I think.
Yeah, the upload schedule is non-existent, but that could change.
Yeah, haha, good joke, Pish. Anyways, his link will be in the description down below. In all seriousness, I appreciate Pish for joining me on this journey to talk about Primal, and if Season 3 has nothing to do with the Primal universe that we've grown used to in these last few years, and there's no point in covering it, I'm at least happy we got to do these 2 videos together.
Yeah, it's been a blast working on both of these icebergs. Thanks for having me on as always, and hope you guys enjoyed it.
That's all we have to say for now. Thank you so much for watching. Merry Christmas, and have a Happy New Year. We'll see you in 2023.